really interested in some of the comments, and I think there's important things in here to consider leaving this experience. Things like amount of time that you have for coaching, and when you have lots of teachers, how do you give quick feedback? How much time do you actually have to spend on a task? How much, if you only have 6 minutes or 4 minutes or 9 minutes or whatever it is, what do you do with that time for each teacher? How can you bundle some of the feedback you give if you have lots of teachers? Those kinds of questions are all coming up. The other things that are coming up are, how do you use virtual, how do you use the virtual world in your own coaching? And how might you add some virtual aspects to your own coaching to try to amplify your effect? I know, Kelly, you talked about that in your post. And then Janelle, you raised this issue related to combining virtual and in person. And blended is probably an option that most people land on, certainly when they try to add some virtual work to their coaching. So anyway, it's interesting. I think those are all questions that I certainly think about all the time, and I'm interested in the ways that you think about them in your own work. So hopefully you had some experience this week using the rubric and thinking about your tasks again. And so I wanted to start there. And Kenneth, I think you're not on the screen, but you're listening at least. Is Andrea here? No, maybe not.
Yes.
Yes?
Andrew's here.
Oh, Andrew, you're here. I wanted to just have a little time to reflect on using that rubric in the reviews after you had already done some feedback. What was the difference with the rubric? What was your experience with the rubric? And I'll ask you to just spend about 4 minutes or so chatting with your partner. And here are the partners: Dorothy and Kelly, Janelle and Glenda, Susan and Erica, and Kenneth and Andrea, to just reflect on that experience. And again, last week it came up that there's a big difference. People preferred giving over getting, or preferred getting over giving feedback. And so does anything related to the rubric actually change your experience of giving and getting feedback? So I'll stop now, and I see Karen Venditti has joined us, one of our 3 coaches. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
You and I can be partners while people are chatting with their partners. Okay, let's hear. What are you talking about with your partner?
Well, Janelle and I were talking about how the language from the rubric kind of keeps it on a neutral keel and kind of keeps it from, being personal. It keeps it more professional. And it's also common, having that common language, no matter what teacher you're working with. So that's kind of where our conversation veered.
So did you find that helpful? Do you find that helpful?
I did. I know that the feedback that you gave me on my rubric, on my task, I ended up incorporating some of the same language back into some of the changes that I made. I thought it was very helpful. It really, it does. It's more of a professional take on it, I guess you could say. It doesn't. As I wrote to Janelle, it kind of takes the sting out of getting some negative feedback, having that, using the language from the rubric. That's the way I felt.
Okay. Who else?
Kelly and I were talking about mine. She gave me some really useful feedback, and I was thinking about how my task probably looks really strange in an ELA classroom because I'm writing a task up for a school-wide design challenge about the opioids epidemic. So it's not specific to character development or theme or plot or anything like that. It's about how to combat, I don't have it right in front of me, but how to combat the opioids epidemic in Central Ohio. And so they're to find the problem and propose a solution, but that really has almost nothing to do with English. So I was trying to explain to her how it's like a school-wide project. So it's not just specific to my classroom, although that's the task in my classroom. So I didn't know if there was any feedback about those kinds of really strange instances where it's not aligned and maybe there's some other reason. Is there a place that I could leave a note like that for a reviewer?
So, I mean, one way to handle that is just put it into a social studies course, to be honest. That would probably take care of the whole thing. Does anybody else have other ideas?
That was my initial thought too. I mean, depending on how you're looking at it through whether it's a health science kind of a social studies, because I think that's a issue that every coach is going to face in the sense that we've got teachers dealing with content where they say it's not English, but we still want them to have the reading and the writing standards as focus standards. So thinking about what are we still focusing on, whether it's, and thinking about which standard in those, the RST, if it's or HST, HR, history and the reading and the history, sorry. And so thinking about that, how we'd help a teacher find those standards that are appropriate.
It is interesting when you're doing a school-wide module where every teacher is going to teach the same module. Then it gets tricky, but that's a way you could solve that in terms of a module construction and the alignment in a module, I guess.
I was also thinking of in the sciences as well, and thinking of some of those CTE courses. And I know that Battelle came out with that instructional ladder design it's about like engineering design. And if kids are proposing like an RFP or something like that, I know that fits in really well there, depending on what Dorothy's having her kids work on. But that's still looking at mentor text to be able to write one of those. So that might fit there too.
And I bet you, Dorothy, you're pretty familiar with those Battelle ones, so probably know what Janelle's talking about.
I know exactly what Janelle's talking about. I'm working with teachers up in the Worcester area on that design module and trying to help them struggle through it. And I worked a lot on the data analysis one myself. I love that series.
Exactly. All right, so other thoughts about using the rubric for feedback and in your own experience or in comparison to not using the rubric for feedback?
Then Janelle and I were talking about the experience helped us to understand what it must feel like to be a teacher and to have someone that you don't know commenting. So we were saying that it felt weird to comment on someone that we don't know personally. Mm-hmm. To be that person and have someone commenting, just kind of, it gives you some compassion. Right?
Yeah.
Erica, did I forget anything?
I don't think so. I like Dorothy, am working with a group of teachers, but mine are from Springfield, Ohio, and I don't know that I could have done this. I don't think that I could coach them having not taken this class, because my only experience is writing it with the module that was pretty much laid out, and I just had to incorporate the items into it. So this has been amazing. And I don't know what word people use. Like I thought of using the rubric allowed me to be abiotic. There were no feelings involved. It was just strictly giving feedback on what I was able to see and what I was able to, I didn't have to infer anything. I just was be able to, give that professional feedback.
What was that word?
Abiotic.
Writing it down,
You
Erica.
should know.
Abiotic just means something that's not living versus biotic that means something that was living. It just kind of, it's kind of sterile. Like feelings don't get in the way. You just get to give the feedback on what the task is. And I don't know, I just guess I felt like it's important to have the relationship, but by using that rubric, I felt like I was giving professional feedback that didn't have anything, like it wasn't contaminated. It's just like, here's the module, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I think, and like that was that.
So that's a really interesting point around the personalization of this work and how teaching is so personal, and we put so much personal into it, and so giving feedback on it can feel so personal. And I was talking with somebody about, you know, that like tipping point where you've done so much work in it that actually no matter what feedback you get, you're not changing a thing because you've already done so much work. And so one of the questions is, how do you get the feedback in there before the tipping point where the teacher's like, you missed the window, too bad for you. So that's something also interesting to think about. There were a lot of comments about how to incorporate feedback and when, but one of the when also is not just around how much time you spend on it, but also when in the teacher's design process you actually give the feedback. Because if you miss that window, then it does become way more personal because they have put so much more work into it. That I always find curious is how to depersonalize this and how to make it not about you, but about puzzle pieces. You know, put the pieces together. Sometimes they fit, sometimes they don't. Let's try it this way and see if these fit. But I have never heard anybody say the word abiotic related to the rubric before. So that's fascinating.
It's just the vocabulary of the my content area.
It's awesome. I know. So Kenneth asked a question in the chat if anybody has any ideas for him about actually manipulating the rubric and giving feedback. Kenneth, is that what you mean? Like, I'm not sure I know exactly what you mean, but I don't know if you're on the phone, because I think maybe you're not on the phone, that you can only type. So if you want to add any information to your question, that would probably be helpful. While we're waiting on that, are there other experiences you want to share about using the rubric?
I'll share something, Suzanne. I think sometimes in working with a group of teachers with a local coach in North Carolina, I've found that the local coach can give better insights as to what her teachers are ready for or not. And so we focused really on just the guiding questions and not so much going into the entire rubric. But some of them were ready for it. So I kind of individualized that one by one, and I gave them choices, because some people want to go right into that and, you know, get this juried and go move forward and all that. But some would have thrown them way out of whack to even see that whole rubric. So we didn't even want to show it. But the guiding questions were shown from the get-go and then kind of referred back to.
So I want to point out what Karen's talking about. Those guiding questions are really, really useful. Oh, it finally pulled up. Oh, well. No, it's weird, right? It's not pulling up. So in each section of the rubric, there are these questions here at the top. And they're really nice questions. In peer review, we call them, they're useful for zooming back out, because a lot of the indicators are just sort of really technical details, and that sometimes it's just really useful to remind yourself of the point. And these guiding questions can be useful in reminding you of the point. So Karen, are you saying that you take these questions out and this is what you have teachers think about it?
Yeah, what we do is we use, actually, there's a worksheet kind of handout, just with the, you know, it's got the guiding questions on a one-page handout. So that's what we use.
Okay.
We've also taken those. Oh, we've also taken those guiding questions and used them in initial learning for teachers when we're teaching them the components of a module, and use them as like stop, reflect, jot down what you now know about a task. And so we've taken those out and turned them into like a reflective note catcher too.
We were talking, I can't remember exactly who had made the comment about the use of questioning as a form of feedback in the last couple sessions, but even being able to use like some or part of the guiding question as you're questioning, to give them a little bit of that more like, okay, the learning's back on you. I don't have to give you the answer. I just have to ask you the question that gets you to think about that. So the guiding questions are a really great place to start. And again, if you're just looking for a specific portion, you can modify those questions to be more tailored to what exactly you want them to look at specifically.
Mm-hmm. So this leads us to the last thing we're going to do together, which I hope is going to be fun. And it's kind of a nice transition, because this sort of makes me think a lot about the student work rubrics and how we use those with students. And do we do similar sorts of things with students that allow our feedback to them to be abiotic in the same ways? And how do we help students think about evidence in their work in ways that are, I think, Glenda, you said sort of professional, right? What I would call like the intellectual discourse of teaching, as opposed to a personal reflection of something about me. So in our agenda, I have linked here a module right here called Pathway Example 1. And I will also put the link in our chat. No, that didn't work. I'll do it a different way. And what I'd like you to do is open that module. All right, so what I'd like you to do first is, this is a task. It's from an ELA classroom. So for those of you who aren't ELA teachers, this might be a little bit out of your comfort zone. So that should be kind of fun, I hope. It's a 7th grade task. And what I'd like you to do is read the task prompt here, and then take a really close read of particularly the 2 reading standards that are attached here. This is since it's an ELA module, there's 2 reading standards as the focus cluster. So R2 would probably be considered the reading standard, and R5 would probably be considered the content standard. So take a look at the 2 standards, their language, and then take a look at the task and see how you think the standard is visible in the task. See if you can color code mentally the task there. So now what we're going to do is I like you to, I want to, for those of you who haven't read Lord of the Flies in a very long time, or who have never read Lord of the Flies, I want to just say that it's a book about a group of boys who are stranded on an island and sort of have to self-govern on the island, and it devolves into some sort of violent interactions among the boys, and there's some death and threatening of death, and so Golding, who's the author, William Golding, there sort of has set up this theme that's mentioned in the task around good versus evil in human nature. So what you're going to do is scroll down to the bottom of the module and see there's a paper here called Good v. Evil Paper 1. I'd like everybody to open up that paper. And in the paper, at the top of the paper, you're going to see the task written. So you have it there on the paper. And then you're going to see the 2 standards. And so the standards, I want to point out, do a couple things. So the first standard, the reading standard, says determine a theme or central idea of a text and analyze its development over the course of the text. And that seems to be the portion of the standard that this task is interested in, because it's talking about the development of the theme over the course of this text. This content standard here, analyze how a drama or poem's form or structure contributes to its meaning. The interesting thing about that standard is this last portion that says contributes to its meaning, in some ways connects these two standards, because it's asking kids to think about how structure contributes to meaning, which you could consider the theme in some ways. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to spend about 7 to 10 minutes, we'll see how we go, coding for these two standards. And so what that means is pick a color, any color you like, and for one standard, and then pick another color, any color you like for another standard. And then if you decide you want to code for the connection between those standards, you could pick a third color, but it's up to you. It's totally up to what you care about and see in the work as we read it. And what I'd like you to do is just read through and think about, do you see any evidence that the student is done this thinking that's described in these two standards here? And then just, if you see something, just color it in the color, well, I'm not doing this properly, but you know how to do it, in the color that you've selected for your two colors, or three colors, depending. So we'll start reading from the top, as we do in ELA, and you can start coding on your paper. And Glenda, I'm gonna, because you can't code for the moment, I will just sort of, I'll try not to go too fast, scroll a little so you can at least be reading the paper, and if you want to make any notes, you certainly can. All right, we'll take about 30 seconds more. No matter where you are is fine. Just look back up at your standards and see if you've coded for either those standards or how they're connected at all. All right, so with your partner, and Beth, you're here now, so I'll put you with Karen, partners with Karen. So with your partner, why don't you just discuss, what did you notice when you were doing the coding? Did you find any evidence of those standards anywhere? Danielle, you and I can be partners. Okay, so I want to open this up to a group discussion. And here, what did you notice when you were doing your coding?
Suzanne, I was sharing with Glenda that I felt like the coding was powerful, although I think it would be time consuming to set up at the beginning for teachers. I think it would just be a huge shift, but super valuable in if you were using like standards-based grading and to be able to communicate to kids and or their parents about what mastery they had achieved at grade level standards.
Okay. Who else?
So I'm eating dinner, which is why I turned off my
Go for it.
thingy. He gave them the theme. So how is this determining the theme? Was my question. Right? Like this is.
You're right. So my coding probably should have been better here. That this was really this portion of the standard. You're right, though. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was an objective summary, so I coded for that, but that was the only thing that I got to code for. Now, I know he's using, that's as far as I've gotten, but I'm still reading.
Really interesting. Really interesting.
Eric and I were noticing that he's really, like, he's talking about mood and tone, and I didn't get into anything about the theme till the very bottom, and it was sketchy. And so I went looking, I grabbed my Common Core booklet and went right in and found, I think it might be, I'm not as good as the rest of you at coding standards, but is it like R7 or something like that? I'm noticing mood and tone. I mean, I even look at, he doesn't have a thesis statement that's specific about what there's nothing about theme there, which there should be. If the student was clear on what the task was, it would be clear in the beginning paragraph about what the essay was going to be about. And
okay. Who else?
Well, I'd like to say that what I did see in the scrolling was lots of direct quotes of the theme, but not a true understanding of the theme. So a lot of quoting of others, what others said was the theme. I think there were two different that I saw, two different quotes. Mm-hmm. But I never got to what the student himself said was the theme.
Okay. Well, the theme was given in the prompt, right? Around this good and evil in human nature.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how was that analyzed?
I only found theme just a little bit towards the end on the third page. The paragraph at the bottom, the line almost to the bottom. Therefore, in order to keep this theme apparent and appearing in the book, both Ralph and Jack, the two sides of human morals and nature, must stay alive throughout the entire book. But I had a lot of trouble with this essay overall. The student says Ralph represents lightness while Jack represents darkness. So I think they got to it there. That's, I think, all I have for right now.
Okay. Other comments about the coding? Did you find places where the two standards connected? This part of the standard where it says contributes to its meaning?
Yeah.
On the top of page 2, I got it talks about the pacing, like when the officers show up, how the story it starts off kind of panicky, and then when the officers show up, the pacing kind of slows down. So I linked that and coded that some with structure.
Structure. Okay.
Yeah, and at the very end, they also talked about the abrupt ending contributing to the overall feeling of the story. That was an intentional structure choice, so I highlighted that as well.
As the connection between the two.
Yeah.
But I don't
Throughout the whole thing, I kept thinking it was really about development and interaction of characters. I mean, with what they put in there. So I was thinking more standard 3 and word choice for overall meaning and tone. So it felt like the student work was leaning more towards standards 3 and 4.
Interesting.
And I don't know if that maybe was more in the instruction.
That's interesting too. Where's my... So this is 7th grade, right? Ease of meaning in
7th grade.
And 4 here. Let's see. Describe characters and explain how their actions contribute to...
Okay, 7th grade.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in 4th grade. Whoops. Particular elements interact. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is take, if you go into the module, whoops, I lost myself. You'll go down and there's a coded example there. What happened? Here it is. And so take a look, open it up and take a look. This is just an example of a coding to give you an example of how someone else coded this paper. And you can open it side by side with yours if you want. So you can compare. You know how to do that? Just make these a little bit smaller and then they'll fit next to each other on the page. Oops.
Suzanne, I just want to interject something too. As people are looking at that, I really felt like the focus of the student was more on R5 versus theme. But I felt the student did address that using the Latin phrase and referring back to that multiple times throughout and trying to come back to that literary device.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that was exactly what the teacher wanted, but that's what I felt the student was focused on.
The problem with the ELA and the reading standards is that the reading standards are slightly problematic from a disciplinary perspective. So literary devices live under R5, which is a funny...
Yeah.
Literary device is such a ELA type of work.
Right.
So, I mean, this part here, how does R5 support the development of the theme, R2, right? So that's the connection there between literary device and then theme. So take a look and see just an example. It's probably different from yours and it's another way somebody has coded. So take a look and see how yours compares. All right, what do you notice? What did you notice about the different codes? How'd you compare? And you may not have gotten this far, I mean, all the way through, which is fine. Go ahead. Somebody was about to talk.
Well, there are some similarities, and I mean, it's kind of a personal thing. I probably coded more text versus what they coded, but I see there's definitely similarities, and it also brings out some things that I might not have seen that they did see, he or she did see.
Okay, other reactions. I saw some heads nodding.
the question also goes to how much time did the teacher who actually coded this spend, and in terms of the time we had, and how much more I might have seen had I done that.
See some comments in the chat. All right, so let's stop there and think about, Janelle, you started this by talking about how this kind of exercise might be useful to think about standards-based grading, but I'm just curious about the experience of coding and what was that like to do, and if this wasn't your discipline, what was that like? Yeah, Erica, you're raising that around the discipline area. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I have very little ELA experience. I mean, I can write, but to look for theme and look for those items that a ELA teacher would be able to pick out right away, I really struggled to make the connections just based on sheer lack of, time spent in that area.
Yeah.
Not that I couldn't find things to code. I mean, mine looked very minimal in comparison to the one that we looked at that was coded.
Who else?
So I guess I had a difficult time because, like, I wouldn't have coded it is necessary as the connection between the two standards, because I hadn't yet seen where they talked about a development of a theme, right? Like he talked about how the literary device is used to create the conical resolution, but he didn't connect it, and I'm using he here, I don't know if it's a boy or girl, but he didn't connect it to even the theme that the teacher provided. Does that make sense? So, and I guess maybe I'm also thinking about this from, high school as opposed to 7th grader as well, what my expectations are or would be. So I need to adjust, I guess, for the lower grade level.
Or not.
Or not. Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I looked at that, whereas I felt, and maybe this was me just, again, it was all up to our interpretation. I felt the student was trying to avoid quoting the good versus evil and trying to move in a direction that he or she felt they could take theme on their own as a student. And again, that's up to how the teacher framed it all in a classroom.
So my question, how do you avoid those things so that they're not unclear?
I mean, he gave him a specific theme. So, like, if I tell my kid, I want you to write about this, I want you to write about this. If I want you to choose your own theme, I wouldn't have given them the theme in the prompt. Does that make sense?
Right.
So I guess that's what I'm thinking about, because I looked at the prompt and it says, it doesn't say the development of a theme. It says the development, and I even have issues of the way he words this theme here in the prompt, but that's what I'm thinking in my mind. So then I'm reading for what the prompt asks for.
So the,
yeah.
Was that somebody's going to say something? No. Okay. So I wanted to do this because I wanted to circle us back around to the competencies that have sort of anchored our time together. And of course, the ultimate competency or the ultimate point of doing any of this LDC work is to figure out how students are doing thinking work and how they're communicating the thinking work that they're doing. So that's the purpose of this whole section of the teacher competencies. It's the purpose of any kind of looking at student work protocols or any kind of looking at student work exercises. Coding is just a particular way of doing that. And I noticed that some people already volunteered to do some coding mini tasks, Kelly. So it's something, the other thing that happened with us is that we all had different evidence and we all had different ways that we considered it. I heard some people say they felt like the student did answer the prompt, and others say they thought the student didn't really answer the prompt. So one of the really important things around coding, or you could call it scoring, or you could call it grading, whatever you want to call it, is calibration. And as somebody brought up standards-based grading, the interesting thing about that is how do we calibrate around evidence and standards, and what do we all consider that evidence to be? And if the point of this is for kids to do thinking work of standards, how are we trying to understand what that thinking work looks like, or could look like, or should look like in student work? So Janelle, you, I believe, said, like, what did you say? You said it's something about using this kind of work with teachers, and it's something I wanted to leave you with, is this thought, which is, how much of your coaching and how much of your time spent with teachers is around looking at student work. So we know that across the country, the districts that have embedded looking at student work as the regular norms of their LDC practice have achieved much more sustainable long-term implementations, probably because of the anchor of using that evidence in student learning and evidence of student learning. So I wanted to leave you with this thinking around, how are you using student work in your coaching? What is evidence of the thinking work? We spent a lot of time talking about tasks, but tasks are supposed to lead to something, and hopefully they're leading to student thinking and the ways of communicating that thinking. And that is kind of the point of all the work we do, is to get kids thinking interestingly and in rich and kind of interesting and deep ways. So I encourage you to think about coding as a way of entering the world of looking at student work. Other ways people do that, and I don't know if you've all seen yet that the new rubrics are in Core Tools. So in Core Tools, you will find them, and they are, here we go. They are here, and they now pop down, and you can select different ones, and now the content rows are going to be available as well. So the social studies, science, and reading standards will now be here under this section, and so you'll be able to select NGSS practices, C3 practices, all the different things for the different disciplines. So one of the ways that people use the rubric is perhaps with one row. So an interesting possibility with this paper might have been to use the development row, perhaps, or the citation of evidence row, because some people brought that up as a question, organization, and certainly any of the other rows. So I have heard of schools where they spend an entire year on one row of the rubric. I know of a school, they spent the entire year on just this development row of the rubric. Again and again and again, and looking and talking and looking at student work and looking at evidence and making sure teachers have calibration, and how, does a 3 in this classroom mean the same thing as a 3 in that classroom? So I encourage you to think about what we just did in terms of what teachers are doing with students, and also what teachers are doing with each other, to think about what they're going to actually look for in their student work. So that is, that's our final activity. I can't really believe it. It seems crazy, but it is. So if you wouldn't mind, as a final hurrah, let's do our final whip around. And a question or phrase you're leaving here today with, either thinking about or that you're interested and excited about heading out of this experience that we've had here together. Did we get everybody? All right. One of the sad things about this is that we won't see each other next week, but we hope that you'll take advantage of some of the additional opportunities that we have to get together. We have peer review training next week, and we'll have more over the course of the year. You can find the events on our calendars. And last year, after we did a deep dive, and then I went to SRAB, and I actually got to meet everybody in person. It was so exciting. So those of you who I haven't met in person, I really look forward to that. So I hope that this has been helpful, and thank you all for spending your Thursday nights with us. It's a real pleasure and a real privilege, I have to say. You're busy, busy people with lots to do. So thank you very much. Yes, come to Nashville. Exactly, Kenneth. Come to Nashville.
And if you haven't checked out our bi-monthly coaches meetings, please do so. We'll be continuing to help with tips, tricks, and tools as you continue your LDC implementations.
Everybody is on that list, right, Danielle?
Yeah, and I'll double check. I'll even make sure Abby does a cross-reference to make sure that everyone is on the list. But you should get invitations to register for each bi-monthly, and it is also on the calendar.
The calendar, people are asking about the calendar. It's only here, right, Danielle?
Oh, so that might not, yeah.
So I thought we had checked last time that everybody had access to this. So if you don't have access to the partner resources, we'll make sure that you do. It's ldc.org/partner. And then there's this important dates and calendars. And so this shows sort of all of the different events that our partners support or that we support, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think our next coach is February, actually.
The next coaching meeting is in February?
Yeah, I think so.
Right here, coaches meeting, February 7th, yeah. Okay. Email reminders are good. I agree, Glenda, they are good. So we try to make sure that we have all the events in various communications that we do.
And please reach out to us at any time. We're here to help.
And Kelly, we're talking soon at some point, right? Do we have something?
November the 4th. We're waiting on Robin to confirm.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night.